Alright, hello, my name is Kendra Winchester. Welcome back to my channel. It is now time for another episode of Appalachian Lit. Yes, I am behind on my wrap-ups, yes, but I've read 8 Appalachian books, so I will have several of these episodes that'll be going up over the course of the next few weeks. So prepare yourselves. There are a lot of books here that I'm very excited to share with you, some of which I've even interviewed the authors, so I'll be sure to have all of the relevant links down in the description box, including a link to the playlist of the previous episodes where you can learn about what is Appalachia, why is it important, what stereotypes are you trying to push back against, Kendra? All of those answers will be down in the description box, and you can go check out those episodes. Today, I'm not going to do any of that. But what I am going to do is share this lovely shirt that I've recently purchased. It explains how to say Appalachia, and I will link it down below. It's from like a place called Hill and Holler, I think. Anyway, it's linked down below. You can go check it out. They have several different types of Appalachian related t-shirts, very Kentucky focused, I will say, but that's fine. Fine in my book. I think I'm a dual citizen or whatever anyway. Anyway, if you want to know, if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm from Appalachian, Ohio. My dad is from Eastern Kentucky, so our family has jumped back and forth across the Ohio River for generations now. My nephew is now the most recent one to jump back across the river to Kentucky, which is exciting for me. Not really anyone else. No one in my family seems excited about me looking at our family tree, but that's fine. I will tell them anyway. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is share 3 books with you that I've recently read and just share my experiences with them. So part of this is a review, part of this is more like these are the reasons why I enjoy the book and why you should go read it too. So let's just jump right in. First up is Hill Women, Finding Family and a Way Forward in the Appalachian Mountains by Cassie Chambers. Now this book reminds me a lot of Sarah Marsh's Heartland in its themes and topics. So what it does is it looks at Cassie Chambers' family from the perspective of the different women in her family. And as the generations progress, each one of them moves farther and farther away from the historic family holler that they used to live in, and eventually Cassie moves from, I believe, Berea, Kentucky, and eventually goes to an Ivy League school and stays there up there for a while in the Northeast, and then gets her law degree and comes back and gets a grant to represent women who are experiencing domestic violence and don't have the money for a divorce lawyer or whatever, and so she represents them for free and has a grant to do that. And she mainly is focused in the Louisville area, which is the opposite side of the state from Eastern Kentucky where she grew up. So it's a really interesting story, and this is like the least review of all of the books I'm going to talk about today, because this is, for me, primarily a thought-provoking exercise. I think when you have someone who comes from a Appalachian setting, a lot of people are going to bring up hillbilly elegy, but I just want to point out that, one, he's from Western Ohio. Also, problematic book on which he tries to label an entire region as what's wrong with them? Why do they choose to be poor? That's not what this is doing, okay? Just, this is how all of us feel when people start talking about hillbilly elegy or bring it up. But see, I can hear your mind. Like, that's where it goes immediately. So I'm just gonna like nip it in the bud here. This book is not about that. This book is about her experience singularly as a person in her relationship with the other women in her family and her relationship with Appalachia. And what that experience is like for her. So there's this moment at the end of the book where she asks her aunt, like, is she still a hillbilly? And she's like, Cassie, not really, but there'll always be a part of you that is. And this book, as someone who is part of the Appalachian out-migration, man, it really hit home, because I did not really understand that I was Appalachian until I left. Like, we don't use that term. Like, it's not really something we are as conscious about until you go to college and you come into contact with like Appalachian studies people and you're like, oh, this is a thing. I didn't realize that, especially as an Ohioan, like, I didn't realize I was part of Appalachia. I just thought like my dad is from Eastern Kentucky. So like, you know, I am, but oh wow, I was the whole time. So were my grandparents, who are also from Appalachian, Ohio. Like, it's so interesting to see like the process of understanding you are Appalachian, what that means in the greater context of your American experience. Also, the last thing is how people from the outside treat you because you're Appalachian. There's a lot of stereotypes and stigma, which Cassie Chambers faced when she went to the Ivy Leagues. There's always this imposter syndrome of her being this like country girl going up to the Northeast to university and to work there at a place where everyone is very about the money and where your family is from and like all this stuff. And she's just like, what is this? So she finds a place for herself and eventually goes back with this grant. This book is very much also a process of understanding her mother, who does pass away by the end of the book. That's not a spoiler. She really is trying to process who she is as an Appalachian woman and how much of her is still Appalachian if she left and she came back and now she lives in Louisville, which is not part of Appalachia technically, and all of these different feelings that she has around where she came from. And a way that she handles that is that she focuses in on the Hill women, on the women in her family, and how each one of them has tried to progressively create a better world for the next generation. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and really I could connect with it. This really made me think about my own past and my own experience of trying to come to terms with things. And it wasn't until much later in my life, when I left college, that I really started to embrace who I was as an Appalachian. It didn't really actually start happening until my grandfather passed away, and I realized how much of my culture had died with him. And thinking about that in this context, so when her mother dies and that disconnect that starts to happen and her desire to go and ask the stories of her elders and to try to understand where she comes from and in a better way is something I deeply relate to. And so this is more of a reaction. This isn't really a review at all. This is her personal just memoir experience. It's clearly written. I think she's running for some sort of governmental office right now. I'll link some stuff down below. You can go check it out. But this really, as a woman, hearing this perspective of other Appalachian women was really interesting and very much thought-provoking. There's no good way to segue from that book, which is really like deep and intense and like Kendra's feeling all the feelings, to this book. This is F-Face, we're going to call it, and Other Stories by Leah Hampton. And this is a very slim short story collection that she put out, and I was able to interview her on the podcast. And I really love being able to talk to her. There was a hailstorm. I had like 8 to 10 audio files to combine to create that interview, but it worked out. We managed it. And I love being able to talk to her about place and about how this book isn't just set in one place in Appalachia. Like, there are very much like distinct pockets of Appalachia. You may have begun to understand if you've watched my videos, or maybe you're Appalachian and you're like, Kendra, I don't understand where you came from. It's fine. This covers West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky. There's like a whole story set in Dollywood, which I didn't know was a thing until I came down here, and I met a friend whose family like obsesses over Dollywood, and I'm just like, I don't understand. But that's fine. It's a total, unique experience depending on where you come from, and that's great for people to have those unique experiences. What I loved about this book is that these short stories take place all over Appalachia, not just in one place. But no matter where they take place, there's something there that makes them unique. The way that she looks at people and kind of takes this character and turns it around and analyzes it from all sides. The way that there's so much humor in this book, the way that she's able to capture these small moments in people's lives where they're forced to make a decision that might seem mundane at that moment, but the choice they make in that seemingly everyday moment changes their futures. And that's something that I was really impressed with, the way that she tackled these stories and the way that she told them was just super, it's just so smart. It's just so incredibly insightful. And I really appreciated the way that she did a mosaic of different kinds of Appalachian people, because we're not just one thing, or all sorts of different things. And that's great. And that's something that I really appreciate about this collection. Also, the title, Conversation Starter. Yes, I love, also her Twitter is great. I'm going to link that down in the description box as well. Go check it out, and I'll link the interview that I did with her over on Reading Women, so you can hear all about this short story collection and what a great time we had. I mean, we had a great time when we were actually able to maintain an internet connection and talk to each other. She lives up in Asheville, which is just a, hour and a half, 2 hours away from me, so I feel like I would, in normal times, I'd be like, let's go get lunch and continue this conversation. But you know what? I will support you from afar, Leah. You are fabulous, and I cannot wait to read your next book. All right, so the last book I'm going to talk about today is a classic in Appalachian poetry. When I was talking to Leah, she was talking about the importance of reading a wide range of Appalachian literature. And one of those categories or areas that she mentioned was poetry, specifically poetry by Black writers. And I think one of the more famous titles or poetry collections is Frank X. Walker's Aphrodita. And in this book, he specifically wants to highlight the experiences of Black Appalachians. He coined this term Appalachia, and it really just looks at the experience of Black Appalachians and some of his experiences that kind of inspired some of these poems and all sorts of different things. I've really enjoyed reading more about him. There is a book called Into the Circle, I think. I'll put the title down here and link. It's on a playlist I already reviewed, but it's where Appalachian writers write about other Appalachian writers, and he's highlighted or profiled in that anthology. So I would definitely recommend go checking that out if you want to know more about his life and career and his perspective on things. But this is my first experience of reading his poetry, and so I really enjoyed seeing this collection. There's a lot of themes about his relation to the women in his family. Appalachian culture is often very matriarchal, and so that's something that he discusses, and how the women really held up the family. There's a poem in here called Statues of Liberty. In the last section of the poem, he says, "This curse-swallowing sorority dodged dicks and bosses before post-war women punched clocks. They birthed civil and human rights, gave the women's movement legs, sacrificed there then to pave the way for a now. Their hard-earned pennies sent us off to college, into the world. Our success is their reward. We are their monuments, but they are our statues of liberty." And it was just a beautiful poem, and he just really captures that imagery in there, and I just have no words. It was one of the first poems that I read in the collection, and it's like, wow. So another one that I really liked was a poem called Sarajevo, and there's a section in here that I really like, and it says, "I wanted to tell her that the word Appalachia was not intended to take lives, was not intended to destroy families or divide communities, that it existed to make visible, to create a sense of place that had not existed for us, for any unwealthy common people of color, now claiming the dirt they were born in." And I think there's often an unfortunate erasure of Black Appalachians, and there's this stereotype of Appalachia being filled with these white working class coal miners. And while coal has been a very important part of the Appalachian economy, that's just not what Appalachia looks like all over the place. That is just one image of Appalachia, and we need to expand that image to include the immense amount of regions and diversity that is within this it's a whole mountain range. Like, there's so many different kinds of people, and I really appreciate what this collection does to highlight Black Appalachians. So I really think this is a great introduction to reading more poetry from Appalachia, particularly poetry by Black writers there. And so this would be a great place to start. It's my first place to start. I've read some poems separately, but never like full-length collections from Appalachia. So I am really excited that I had the opportunity to read this, and would definitely recommend. I'm going to link down below an account that I've been following over on Instagram recently, and it's called Black in Appalachia. And there now is a podcast hosted by two Black women. I think one is an academic and one is a journalist, and they both specialize in race in Appalachia in that region. They have listed their full titles in the episode. And so they have a lot of experience and different things that they bring to the podcast, which is fabulous. And I've really enjoyed their episodes and would highly recommend if you want to know more about Black culture in Appalachia. And so 100% recommend. Go forth. So yes, definitely go check that out. Well, that's it for today's episode. Make sure to go check out that account, and also if you want a more frequent update on Appalachian Lit from me, definitely go check out Read Appalachia. So alright, that's it for this time, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.